Joining us right now is George Fishman. George Fishman is the senior legal fellow at the Center for Immigration Studies. They know the ins and outs of immigration law, which is, something that I assure you most of the talking heads on cable news don't know. George, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's my pleasure.
So the Supreme Court decision yesterday, it appears to at least temporarily allow for the Trump administration to remove the T from TPS, the temporary protective status that many illegal immigrants were able to enjoy while under President Biden. This affects over 300,000 Venezuelans. And forgive me, I just want to confirm this. The vast majority of these Venezuelans didn't actually come to this country on their own. The Biden administration actually flew them in. They went and got them, right?
Well, there's there were two programs, especially for Venezuelans. The first is the temporary protected status one, which the Supreme Court ruled on just a day or two ago. The second one was a parole program in which, yes, in fact, aliens could fly in at the invitation of the Biden administration. This Supreme Court decision regards the first program, TPS, and TPS is for people who've already come into the United States, usually who are here illegally.
I see. Okay. And there was one federal judge that stopped the administration from being able to do this. The Supreme Court said, no, you can't do that. But is this temporary? Is this still being adjudicated? Will there be some sort of – I mean, there's so many of these cases, George, and if you could just sort of, if possible, give us sort of a status report on the administration's ability to execute the laws of the land. That's what the executive branch is supposed to do, is it not? Because it seems like every attempt to do so is blocked by a lower federal judge, and in some cases the Supreme Court is upholding those blocks.
Yeah, it all goes to the temporary protected status statute, which Congress passed in 1990. And it deals with situations where there's a natural disaster in another country, where there's an ongoing war in another country, and the president has the option to temporarily allow people, usually here illegally, to stay in the United States for a period of 6 months up to 18 months, while that natural disaster or man-made disaster in that other country plays out.
Of course, we know Salvadorans are in this country from, I believe, a hurricane or an earthquake from like over 20 years ago. So, look how temporary that can be. Can you remind me, George? And I apologize for not. I apologize for not knowing this, but what was the big disaster in Venezuela that suddenly we opened our doors to 300,000 people from that country?
It wasn't a natural disaster. Presumably, it was the political instability. It was the regime of Maduro. So it can be a war. It can be an internal revolution or civil war that can trigger it. But again, just as you said, abuses of TPS have become legion. I once pondered that had the volcanic eruption in Krakatoa, I think in 1879, occasioned TPS, probably those aliens and their descendants would still be in the United States under TPS for something that happened over 100 years ago. Abuse has become legion prior to the Trump administration.
It has become legion, and also even this. You mentioned like political turmoil or war. Those things don't necessarily mean human rights abuses or genocide. That's the thing that, to me, is one of the biggest abuses, is once there's political turmoil in a country, we open our doors. Well, there are lots of countries that there's political turmoil and there isn't sort of these widespread human rights abuses. So that, too, has sort of, people have taken advantage of that. Wherever there is sort of some disagreement in a country, it seems that especially, well, really only Democrats seems to think that we should welcome all of those people. And then when you have a situation like in South Africa, where white farmers really are facing violence and the loss of property because of their color of their skin, Democrats object. That to me is very, maybe you can explain that.
Yeah, it's there's a lot of hypocrisy going on. Unlike asylum, where an alien, usually here illegally, is claiming you can't send me back because I'll be persecuted. Generalized violence in a country, that doesn't qualify for asylum.
Right.
However, for temporary protected status, at the president's discretion, if there's a war, if there's generalized violence, which does not involve persecution, someone isn't being targeted because of their race, of their religion, something like that. There's just a very dangerous situation. The statute does allow a president, in their discretion, if they choose to give nationals of that country who are in the U.S. temporary protected status. But as you guys have indicated, when this is extended for years, extended for decades, it becomes a clear abuse of the statute. Because, for instance, if there's a hurricane and nationals of a country are given TPS status because of a hurricane, no one can reasonably argue that 10, 20, 30 years later, they still can't go back to their home country because of a hurricane that happened decades ago. It's a clear abuse.
Right, but then the argument becomes, well, they've made this their home, they've put down roots, they've been, and then we're stuck where we are. Real fast, George Fishman, because you were the acting chief counsel for the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. We keep hearing, we heard from Tim Walz over the weekend when he was giving a commencement address, that nobody's getting due process here, and that they should each have their day in court. What does that exactly look like when it comes to immigration law? What does a day in court look like, and is that a reasonable expectation if the Trump administration says, listen, you were here temporarily and now you go home? Or for that matter, we think you're Tren Aragua, we think you're MS-13. Under Alien Enemies Act, we should be able to deport you, no questions asked. Do those people have an opportunity through habeas corpus or what have you to say, no, I'm not Tren Aragua? What does that look like, that due process?
Yeah, I mean, under the immigration law, under the Constitution as the Supreme Court has interpreted it, to deport an alien who is in the United States, they deserve a hearing. So you have to give them a hearing. Once they have a hearing, you can deport them, but they do have an obligation. So they do have a right to a hearing.
I just want to be clear.
There's now a backlog in immigration court of 3.6 million cases.
Yeah,
that is the result of it.
I know, and it's horrible. And real fast, they get that hearing, and are they allowed to appeal the ruling of that hearing?
They are allowed to appeal. That's under the laws Congress has passed. Congress can change those laws, but under current law, they go before an immigration judge. They can appeal that to the Board of Immigration Appeals. They can appeal that to federal court. That can all be changed by Congress, but that's the law as Congress has established it.
And how long does that process take? Each decision and appeal until there's a final deportation order?
Yeah, it can take years and years. Yeah. Most of these people are not detained. We actually don't know where most of them are, even though they're supposed to give us their addresses. And that's why there's such an attraction to things like using the Alien Enemies Act, because you can use that. The president can use that if it's a situation that allows it to be used to get around all those procedural roadblocks, which really make it impossible to deport large numbers of aliens under the standard immigration law. The highest number of aliens who have ever been removed under standard immigration law removal proceedings, the highest number ever, was about 238,000 in 2009. So to get appreciably higher than that, you're going to have to use alternate mechanisms, if they work, such as the Alien Enemies Act, such as during the COVID pandemic, use of Title 42. But use of the standard immigration law, that's
I'm
the roadblock we have.
I
with
appreciate it,
3.6
George. I'm
million
sorry for
cases.
cutting you off. I know it sounds rude, but I'm a slave to the clock on the radio, and I've already broken free of the chains too many times this morning. Thank you, George Fishman
George.
from the
A pleasure.
Center for Immigration Studies. It's 6:48.